Chapter 26. Aaron Hitman. A wet darkness buried Gabriella. The cold smack of the water on her back made her forget the jabbing pain in her chest. For a moment, she contemplated inhaling and not breaching the water's surface ever again. Sade's words had wounded her more deeply than his sword ever could have. He had known that. He had done it with intent. The thought sparked a new fury of anger in her. She surfaced, spitting. She could move her arms without pain in her chest. Sade's sword had bruised her, but no more. From above, on the deck of the Sevor ship, a whip crack sounded and echoed again off the houses along the water's edge. Adamantus moaned in pain. It was too terrible to hear. Gabriella dove under the water and swam for shore. Beneath the docks, she felt weeds and muck pass along her. She struck pilings in the darkness, her wrist flaring with pain when she bent it against one. Finally, the ground swept up and she was on the shore, lying in the refuse and scum that had floated there. She deserved nothing better. She wept and coughed, inhaling the odor of dead fish. Thankfully, she could no longer hear the whip cracks, but she could not remain there. There was fire within her, an anger building. She did not know where to direct it. The Sevor were too powerful, but she had to release it. If not, it would turn to a sorrow so great it would consume her. Then Gabriella knew. The fire spread throughout her body. No more tears. She stood and ran. She thought she had run quickly earlier that night, when desperation and hope had driven her to the dock. But now, her rage was the greater spur. She ran with the wind rising in her ears. She screamed her breaths outward and hissed inward through bared teeth. Gabriella burned a path along the road out of the town, past Chief Salinger's house, past the baker's cottage, where the lamplight and the smell of bread reminded her that dawn was not far now. She ran faster. She knew the path well. She had taken it many times. She raced around the harbor under the gloomy reach of the Caledonian trees. Her fury made her reckless. She stubbed her toes on roots. She fell over ruts. It was worse than the first night when she had followed Omanuju through the forest into the darkness. She knew she was bleeding, but she was beyond pain, even as she tripped and fell into a ditch. She gathered herself up, not pausing to catch her ragged breath, and ran on. The path widened. She ran on the shore, her feet slapping on the mud and sand. The village was distant, but Gabriella knew that the ship of the Sevor would soon be leaving with the tide. There was one last house to pass, Mab Miller's. She would have spat in the direction of his homestead if she had not been so out of breath. She dipped down into the creek bed that marked the border of Miller's land. This was the place that had caused them so much trouble. It was but land, she thought as she ran. It was a passive player. She remembered the voices that had set all these events into motion. She now knew who had started this voyage. The dead. The Miller's house, a mansion compared to others on Harkness, was a dark tombstone beyond the Caledonian tree trunks. Gnarled branches stretched overhead. Gabriella reached the tower, that looming monolith of mortarless black stone. She stopped, body heaving as she gasped for breath. She raised her head and took 3 deep breaths. She did not want to address the dead with a broken voice. The prophecy rang in her head. If a worthy Harkonite goes in search of Nicomedes' treasure and returns, the price will be paid, and the Sevor will trouble Harkness no more. Her chest filled again, and she cried out, "You tricked me! You tricked me! You sacrificed them for yourselves!" By them, she meant Omanuju, Adamantus, even Mortimer. The lantern that symbolized the dead's presence burned, its red light reflected in the harbor water, but there was not a sound. Gabriella went to the tower wall, kicked dirt, and spat upon it. She directed every blasphemous curse she could think of at the dead. Nothing stirred. Perhaps Mortimer was right. Perhaps the dead and the gods that commanded them were just a figment of the collective imaginations of the villagers. But she did not believe it. She knew that they had turned their backs on her. They had used her, used Adamantus. She needed to get their attention. She reached into her shirt and drew out the whistle. As she squeezed it in her fist, her head still pounded with exertion. She rubbed its surface, feeling with her thumb the parting clouds, the rising city whose walls never crumbled. The whistle had served them so well during her dance on Congeal and against the Wyvern. Gabriella knew it was still imbued with magic. power in proportion to the wilderer's desperation, Adamantus had said. She snapped the strap around her neck. The wall of the tower was rough to the touch. With her hand, she found a stone sticking out that made a suitable ledge. Gabriella placed the whistle there. She ran to the harbor's edge, where water lapped at the shore. She waded in, running her hands along the slick, muddy bottom. The lanterns on the Sevor ship across the harbor were now lit. The ship was leaving. Gabriella groped the harbor bottom. She felt a rock beneath her hands and yanked it out of the muck. The water whirled and slurped loudly as she sprinted back to the tower. She stood over the whistle and lifted the stone. Glancing up towards the top of the tower, she thought of Mortimer Creedley. Perhaps his irreverence would serve her now. The Sevor ship was sliding out of the dock. It was the last impotence she needed. "I'm sorry, Adamantus," she said. She brought the rock down on the whistle. It rang so loudly the sound hurt her ears. She ignored the pain and struck the silver cylinder again. This time, the sound was even greater, and with sparks. Her arm was flying now. She brought the stone down once more. This time, there was a bang, a blinding flash, a pain between her eyes. All went dark. She was falling. There were voices all around her, angry voices, hateful voices. Gabriella had their attention now. She had earned their malice, but she was unafraid. She held the courage of one who had already lost everything. She was falling. She had submitted to their power, and it was within their power to destroy her. But they did not. As she fell, they were kept at bay, and she could sense their frustration, even their fear. But why? She fell, but the dead could not touch her. She was under someone's protection. Someone even the dead could not cross. Even their power is limited, she realized with satisfaction. She was falling. Then she was not. She was lying on the ground. There was light around her. She stood up. She was beside the harbor, but it was day. What time of day she was unsure. The sun was obscured by clouds. It could have been morning. It could have been the cusp of evening. The air high above the water was obscured with vapors and mist that rose in strange curling motions from its surface. Her boots left behind on the dock were back on her feet. Her clothes were dry. So was her hair. She ground the gravel of shore beneath her foot. The stones sounded distant, leagues away. The water of the harbor was limpid, so clear that the bottom was visible as if nothing covered it but glass. Fields of seagrass and forests of seaweed swayed in the gentle currents. It was like a secret revealed. The water on the shore caressed the rocks gently. Each stone looked like a jewel. The green of the moss at the foot of the trees was the green of life. Nothing like the cursed green in phallic stone. The trees were free of cracks, markings, or carvings. They were perfect, intact, white as if fashioned from snow. This place before Gabriella was beautiful, and she half expected to see that the dilapidated tower had disappeared. The village was invisible, obscured, or disappeared entirely. It was like Harkness before humans had come to settle, the Harkness that moved outside the human time. This Harkness was eternal. Before she turned to see if the tower still stood, Gabriella realized she did not want to see the tower, that sign of humans and their meddling and the grotesque manipulations of the clinging, rotting dead. But when she turned and saw the structure, it had been transformed, now beautiful, taller. Gone were the marks of decay and the black filth of corruption. Its surface was smooth and polished. The bricks were lavender like the sea on a spring morning. The tower was now free of fissures. The windows were filled with panes of glass that gleamed brightly. Nothing like the empty skull sockets of the tower she knew. It was a monument to all things steady, to all things that persevered. It was not a tower of memories and loss. It was a tower of stewardship. Unlike the tower of the dead which lurked in shadow even on cloudless days, this one was cradled in sunlight, its sides shining as if varnished. Gabriella found herself standing before the tower door, now painted the same lavender color as the rest of the structure. Carved in its center was a symbol Gabriella recognized from the maze back on Dis, an elegant design she had admired. The design was a double-ended scythe, the sweeping blades implying a circle around the staff. Struck with the staff were 3 hash marks. The simple symbol was laden with meaning that she could not comprehend. When the door swung open, Gabriella jumped, but it was too late to hide. A woman stood, holding the door open. Blonde hair fell softly to her shoulders. Her eyes were blue jewels, and her skin was like ivory. Although her face was beautiful and feminine, the woman's dress was martial, blue armor with a red war cloak draped over it. On the breast of her armor, as well as the side of the cloak, was a spinning scythe symbol. She smiled kindly at the girl on the doorstep. "Gabriella," she said. Gabriella was seized with panic. She did not know this woman, but something about her bespoke of power beyond any royalty. Gabriella fell to her knees and dropped her face to the ground. "My lady," Gabriella said. As she bent downward, she glimpsed the sword hanging on the woman's belt. It was a strange iridescent metal that Gabriella did not recognize. "Rise, young lady. There is no need to bow to your sister." Gabriella stood but kept her head down, responding to an inner urge to show some type of deference. As she met the woman's gaze, a slight smile played across her face. Gabriella realized how silly she must have appeared. "I am Orin of Hintland," the woman said. "Am I dead?" Gabriella asked. "No." Orin smiled again. Gabriella asked a second question. "May I ask, my lady, what is your office?" "You may, but you might not understand." Gabriella nodded, waiting. "My office, now, is to guard the seal of Dormain." Gabriella nodded again. "What is the seal, madam?" The woman stretched out her hands as if to refer to all the space around her. That was her answer. Gabriella noticed her hands were marked with the same spinning scythe symbol as her cloak, her armor, and the door. The skin of her left hand was whiter than that of her forearm, like the memory of an old wound. "My lady is right. I do not understand." Orin smiled but said nothing more. She walked towards the water, her feet making substantial noise upon the gravel. Gabriella assured herself that a ghost would not make such noise. She followed. Lady Orin took in the view. It was beautiful. The soft light was almost palpable. The far shore was visible in surreal detail, just as Gabriella had been able to view the seaweed beneath the harbor water. Gabriella had seen such visions only in her dreams. Orin appeared transfixed, but Gabriella was not sure if the woman was studying the distant shore or the wafting forms rising from the water. Every wisp of mist seemed to be just on the verge of taking on a shape of something real and living. How long they paused there, Gabriella could not tell. Her sense of time had been erased. Finally, Orin spoke. "They are angry with you, Gabriella. Angrier than I have ever heard them before." Gabriella was puzzled. Who was angry? The Sevor? The dead? Chief Salinger and his wife? She thought it best to reveal as little as possible and let Lady Orin continue. The tactic often worked with her parents, but Orin was wise to her. "I said, they are angry with you." "I am sorry, my lady. Unfortunately, that list is long just now. I am not sure whom you mean." Orin smiled again. "I know. You have certainly been in the middle of things, Gabriella Carlyle." Gabriella nodded. The woman continued. "I refer to the dead. They are very angry with you." "I blasphemed them." "Indeed. But the trick was theirs first. You were just, Gabriella. They are angry because they do not like to be bested or called out on their treachery, especially when righteousness is on the side of their accuser." "Was that not disrespectful?" "It was. It was also dangerous. But the dead are not gods. You must remember that. They are a part of everything like you and me." Gabriella could hardly imagine being the same part of things as this woman, not to mention the dead. But she remained quiet and listened as Orin talked. The dead deserve the same respect given to anything, anyone else. No more, no less. And it should be reciprocal, although it is not always. For even the dead are limited. Even the dead can be selfish, as they have been in this instance. Gabriella wanted to ask if this meant things would be righted, but she thought it better to show humility first. "Will they punish me?" "I hardly think they have a right to. Be warned, it is not beyond them. But not now. They will not dare, now that you have my protection. You must realize, Gabriella, that the dead are not as they were in life. They are changed. They are hungry for life. It is why they remain here in this place, feeding off the gifts, the adoration, the attention of those whom they envy so much. The living." "Where is this place? This tower? The other side. It was all Orin would say. As Orin walked along the shore, Gabriella following, they approached a lantern. Gabriella counted 7 lanterns, each hung on a pole shaped like a shepherd's staff. The lanterns were in a line leading away from the water, each one increasing in height as they went up the shore. The lanterns burned with thick wicks, the flames wavering in a breeze that Gabriella had not felt at the tower. It was strong enough that some of the lights nearly went out, but somehow each continued to burn. The lanterns rocked, their chains groaning. The rustling links looked as if they might break at any moment. Gabriella noticed an 8th lantern sitting on a post out into the harbor. Its light seemed brighter than all the others. "What are these?" Gabriella asked. "Think of them as 7 tombs or 7 prisons, for those whom they represent are not dead." Orin said this with regret, as if she wished it were otherwise. "Why is that one in the sea?" "She is not bound, but even alone, she is a great peril." "But why is she in the water?" "The last time she was seen, she had been cast from the floating city into the sea." "Who would have done that to her?" Orin's face darkened with remorse. Gabriella wished she could have taken back her question. "These are old betrayals that you should not worry about." Orin turned and walked back towards the tower. She stopped again where she had gazed into the harbor, but this time her eyes were fixed upon Gabriella. "What remains to be decided is what to do with you and your request." "My request?" "To help Adamantus. That is why you came here." It was. Gabriella realized. She did want to help Adamantus, wherever he was, but she found she had difficulty remembering where she had come from in the first place. She looked in the direction of the vanquished village. Trees and heather covered a shore that was free of any signs of human occupation. Docks and ships had disappeared. Had the village ever been there? "We have not much time. You can stay here only so long before you are drawn on to the other place. Already, you are forgetting, aren't you?" Gabriella hesitated. "I think I am, but I remember Adamantus. I want to help him." With the thought of him, it felt as if a thread passed through Gabriella's heart and began to draw her back to where she had come from. "I don't want to go back," she said, resisting the pressure. "Everything is so sad there, and everything is peaceful here. They have taken him away, and it is my fault." With those words, something broke inside her, and she wept, sobbed, as she had not cried since she was Damien's age. She shook, and her breath came in gasps. She fell to her knees. "But I deserve it," she said. "I have not been a good friend. I have been even less of a sister." Gabriella tried to say more, but choked. She felt unworthy of the tranquility around her. The shapes of mist from the lake drifted up around the two of them. Gabriella took a deep breath and attempted to speak again. Her voice was a pathetic croak. "Please, I don't want to return. I'm too ashamed, and I can't bear to lose Omanuju and Adamantus." "I can release Adamantus, Gabriella, if you wish it." Gabriella stopped her crying and looked up. "There is a condition," Orin said. Gabriella nodded. "Please tell me, what must I do?" "You will never see him again. Adamantus will live, but where he goes you cannot follow. You will carry that sadness in your heart the rest of your living days, just as he will carry his." Gabriella could not bear Orin's gaze. She looked down at the stones at her feet. Stone was all her world consisted of at that moment. Stones of the grave, a stone in her heart, a millstone of sadness slung around her neck that would grind her down with the weight of loneliness until all that remained was dust. She pictured her father sitting in the darkness earlier that evening, holding the broken whistle. She pictured herself holding the whistle she had broken, growing old, without the joy of the elk's magic and company, the kindness in his eyes and the wisdom in his voice, co-signed to a life of ordinariness as her father had been. Her long life stretched terribly before her. But if Adamantus were to live, his heart to beat, she realized it was no choice at all. "It is enough that he lives," Gabriella said. "Then it is done." Gabriella looked up into Orin's tranquil face. The woman's lips curved up into a faint smile. It could not be so easy, Gabriella thought. She wanted to stand, but she was too weak. Orin knelt down beside her, her face the picture of compassion. Gabriella had to look away to keep her sobs from coming back. She felt that thread at her heart, tugging her now with all the insistence of the lonely world awaiting her. Oren took Gabriella firmly by the chin and turned her face to meet her own. You have learned the reality of true love tonight, Gabriella, but I won't let you leave without a second gift. Oren moved her marked hand to Gabriella's cheek. Gabriella pictured that same symbol, the double-ended scythe, spinning in her mind. Oren leaned forward and kissed Gabriella's forehead. For a moment, a fleeting moment, all her cares were lightened, the thread pulling at her heart gone. That, Oren said, drawing away, is the essence of all the gods. A kiss on my forehead? Gabriella asked. The pressure had returned to her body, and she felt herself being drawn away. It was too late. She saw Oren smile. Then she was gone. Gabriella woke in her wet clothes. The sky overhead was lightening. The woods were noisy with the dawn's songs of birds. As she blinked her eyes, she felt something sticky on her face. She touched her forehead. Blood. A great deal, actually, accompanied by a rising bump on her temple. She propped herself up on her elbow. Her shoes were still missing. Her toes were a bruised, wounded mess, her toenails tattered and bleeding. Beside her on the shore rested one half of the shattered whistle, a reminder of the pain she had forgotten in her confusion. With a sinking heart, she realized that perhaps those moments between sleeping and waking, those moments she had just experienced, would be the only moments in her life when she might forget the sorrow she felt clinging to her body, like her wet clothes. Now she had returned to the world of the real, reminded by her shivering limbs, tattering teeth, and stubbed and bleeding toes. She crawled over to the broken whistle and took both pieces in her hands, as one would a wounded creature. She cried for it, as if it were something once alive. There was a split stone beside it, the stone she had placed the whistle on. Both stone and whistle had snapped. It did not take long for her to realize what had happened. A piece of the stone had struck her in the head, knocking her unconscious. The woman in the tower, the lanterns, had it all been a dream? What of the dead? She scrambled up. The tower looked the same to her, but it felt changed, as if it had been drained of its power, as if it were only a pile of stones. There was one way to find out. She went to the door, the black-rotted cypress wood door. It could not have been more different than the one she had dreamed about with the lavender paint and spinning scythe. She kicked it open with a cry at the pain and stepped inside. The empty space was stuffy and smelled of mold. She felt spiderwebs across her face. She stood in the center and held out her arms, throwing her head back to shout. I defy you! I have violated your sanctuary. I have insulted and blasphemed you. And I am unrepentant. I call upon you to take your righteous vengeance and kill me. Nothing happened. The dead did not retaliate. The gods were silent. Mortimer was right. They were a myth, all of them, make-believe. Then she remembered her dream. You are under my protection. Had she just dreamed what she had wanted, as Mortimer said everyone did? Or had Oren protected her? Maybe she would never find out. Maybe she would. She ran out the door and turned left down the shore. In her dream, this was where the lanterns had been. There was nothing but rocks, tree roots, and cattails now. The water of the harbor was opaque once more. The messy jumble of village houses and their pall of chimney smoke was in place again. Gabriella sprinted up the shore, and after a few minutes of running, left the harbor and crossed into a grass field. Unlike in her dream, her movement took effort. Her body felt heavy and tired. She was on the far side of the harbor now, where the land rose to the point that it looked over the harbor and the sea. The Sevwar ship was gone, and dawn was upon her. The harbor was a lavender color that reminded her of the dream. She could not help laughing a bit at her own desperate imagination. As she climbed the hill, she could see the town below her. The empty shore of her dreamscape had been replaced by houses, docks, and moving ships. Yet something about the town she had known all her life was less permanent, for she had seen Harkness without Harkonites, an island outside of time, a harbor with limpid water and floating ghosts. The Sevwar ship was gone from the harbor, the mooring lines coiled on the dock where it had been. The sun was now up in the east, a bright orange ball that turned the grass around her, the color of flames. Her shadow stretched long up the hill, growing shorter as she reached the top. The breeze had a hint of warmth. She picked out the speck of the Sevwar's red sails far out to sea. The sky was clear, yet to the west hung black clouds streaked with lightning, their edges lit blood red by the rising sun with an unnatural fury. The sea was calm except for the waters in the storm shadows. There the surface boiled with froth and white caps. The Sevwar ship was a mite beneath a hammer, sailing directly into the night. It is done. Could it be? She watched the ship until a curtain of rain was drawn across it, and it disappeared. Gabriella stared out into the sea, fighting off a sense of emptiness. She would hope that was all she could do. She walked back through the field slowly, her feet sore and bruised. Her tears of rage came and went. A few times she simply collapsed. But when she felt no relief in idleness, she stumbled forward once again. She wept for Adamantus, for Omanuju, Gayday, even for Mortimer. Her rage was replaced by a heavy sense of loss. Yet at times she laughed, as she thought of some of the humorous things Gayday would have said about her mad dashing across the island. What would Omanuju say about her sodden and torn clothes, and her gnashing of teeth and pounding of the earth? She must have been a bit mad. As Gabriella reflected on the past hours, the events of the previous night seemed like a dream. She could not help but shake her head with incredulity at what she had said to Chief Salinger. Things would never be the same now. Her father, one of the most upright citizens of Harkness, had spent the night in the drinker's cell. She smiled and wept anew at the thought of his devotion to her. Eloise's too. Somehow, she covered the ground between the cliff top and the road leading to her house. Smoke billowed from the chimney. She would have to explain to her mother where her father was. She would also have to explain why one of her best shirts was ruined and why her boots were missing. As she took inventory, she realized she had lost her mother's cloak during the night. Gabriella briefly wondered if she should return to the village and search for her lost belongings instead of returning empty-handed. But she was so tired. She was no longer afraid of her mother anyway. Something had shifted between them. Gabriella knew that they would meet as women now, equals. As she reached home, the smell of the breakfast wafting out of the kitchen made her stomach growl. Gabriella needed to eat. She could fetch her boots and her mother's cloak when she went to town to retrieve her father from the chief's office, a trip that would necessitate another uncomfortable meeting with Salinger himself. She definitely needed breakfast before that encounter. She needed all the strength she could muster. She would, for each passing day, each day that she would press onward through the suffering. She thought of Oren's gift, a kiss on her forehead, and a certainty welled up within her. Loss would always be a part of her, but that kiss, it told her something. She would never recover, but Gabriella knew with certainty that she would endure. She turned into the yard. Damien was sitting on the steps to the house. His nose was buried in one of her own arithmetic books, his head ticking with a slow rhythm. She realized now the book was surely too simple for him. Gabriella stopped at the foot of the stairs. If her brother was happy to see her, he did not show it. He simply looked up with flat eyes. "Eloise was here," he said. "She went to town. She said she would be back." "She is a good friend. Did you eat breakfast?" "Yes." "Well, I have not. We'll quiz you on your numbers while I eat." Damien closed the book, stood up from the step, and shuffled after her into the house where breakfast waited on the table. After she ate, they leafed through her books together, and so began a custom for them after meals and before bedtime. Gabriella spent more time with Damien from that day forward. She no longer grew as impatient with him. She found she could go days now without feeling resentful that he was her brother. Sometimes she would catch herself gazing into his eyes, reminding herself that he, too, had seen this. His ears had heard the roar of the mother wyvern, and like her, he had been bathed in mage fire. Gabriella heard her parents remark upon her newfound devotion to her brother. In time, the notoriety they both suffered on the island faded. Harkness enjoyed great prosperity from the healthy coffers funded with the treasures the Carlisle children had brought back. Neighbors whispered less and less when Gabriella and Damien passed. Strained difference turned into simple friendliness. They took their place among other children, their family, just another family, their village, just another village, their island, just another island. A wealthy island, but still, just one island among many. But for one exception, a tree. The spring after Gabriella and her brothers returned, a tree sprouted near the shore of the harbor. It grew prodigiously, and its silvery bark was visible from afar. Families all over the island made day trips to the tree. Children played in its shade. In a month, families might visit the tree more often than they visited the old crumbling Tower of the Dead. Coins minted on Harkness now displayed the tree's spreading boughs, rather than the tower they once had. Soon it was a custom for the sailors of visiting ships to gather on deck as they rounded the point to watch as the tree came into view. Ships that had no cargo for Harkness would sail into the harbor just so the crew could gaze upon the tree. There were legends of how the tree had appeared, but in truth, no one knew with certainty where it had come from. Many tales surrounded the most distinguishing feature of the tree, the color of the leaves. But, in the end, no one could explain why the leaves were blue. No one but Gabriella Carlyle, but she never told. She preferred it this way. Some things were better left as mysteries.